Hello.
Hey, Javon, how you doing, man?
I'm pretty good.
We are fired up to make you part of us, man.
You know it.
Can't wait till you get out to the Bay Area, man.
Looking to add to what is already a strength on the team, the 49er Brain Trust stayed in character with their first-round pick of the 2020 draft.
And let me ask you this, can I trust you? Can I trust you with my entire family?
Well, that's one heck of a question, but I think John Gruden was referring to his Raider family. We've got first-round draft pick Damon Arnett's response, and we'll go deep inside the Raiders draft with Vic Tafer of The Athletic.
How you doing, everybody? I'm Joe Fonzi along with Jason Appelbaum. Welcome to this special KTVU Fox 2 draft show. And Jason, I guess these are the signs of the times. We are not out of set looking at each other, across from each other, but rather you're in your home and I'm in mine. But that's not unlike the way the NFL did things this week either, is it?
Yeah, well, listen, Roger Goodell was in his basement and I'm in my basement, but we're happy to have the folks at home joining us on KTVU.com. It was an unprecedented draft like no other, and that's because Las Vegas, they were going to do it there, but we all know because of social distancing and the stay-at-home orders, the streets were vacant in Las Vegas, Joe.
You know, I think depending on your point of view about the Raiders moving to Las Vegas, some people might see that as somewhat a poetic justice. That was their chance to have their big splash in their new city. And now no party, and they've said they're going to postpone it for a couple of years and give Las Vegas the draft in a couple of years.
So instead, we headed downstairs to Commissioner Roger Goodell's basement in New York. And listen, I like this draft. Maybe it was because, Joe, we had gone 41 days or 42 days without a live, I guess, quote unquote, sporting event. Even though this wasn't a game, it was still something fun to watch. And I like seeing everyone at home with their families, John Lynch with his family and Kyle Shanahan with his family. It made it much more relatable, much more real. It was different. And I was actually interested in this whole thing.
Yeah, and I think the one thing the commissioner could not do is get booed when he was introduced. And if he was getting booed when he was getting introduced there, it would be by his own family in his own basement. So he had a little bit of a safe haven this year.
No, that's right. So let's get to it. You're back on Thursday. The 49ers, they made a draft day move. They only moved down one spot. They traded picks with Tampa Bay. And with that 14th overall pick, Commissioner Roger Goodell tells us who they got.
The San Francisco 49ers select Javon Kinlaw.
Best reaction of the night, I think. Javon Kinlaw's father falling to the floor off the couch after he heard his son was drafted by the 49ers. Defensive tackle, 6'5", 215 pounds, said to be one of the more violent tacklers in the draft class. He's out of South Carolina. And a really amazing story, Joe. His mom's from Trinidad and Tobago. He grew up in Washington, D.C. in a rough part of town, homeless for part of his youth, moved in with his father in South Carolina for high school to kind of get away from any possible trouble in D.C. And you see some of his unique training techniques. Didn't even play football till he was 15, but Kinlaw said all of that made him stronger.
You just can't give up on yourself. Times definitely get rough. I didn't really expect myself to even be here, I didn't expect myself to be a collegiate athlete, but I stuck it out, I stuck with it.
Well, the thing I think with Kinlaw, and I was on a conference call with John Lynch earlier in the week when he was talking about when the 49ers initially had moved up to the 13th spot by trading DeForest Buckner, they recognized that they lost one of the strengths of their team, and they said they were looking for what they would consider a foundational player. And if that player was there, they were going to take that player. He wouldn't tell us who those people are, Jason, but I really believe Kinlaw was one of them, and he's the guy that they took at that spot.
Well, you know who apparently was another one, because they again made a trade. They moved up 6 spots, traded with the Minnesota Vikings, traded a couple of late-round draft picks to move up 6 spots to number 25, and that's when they took Brandon Ayuk, the wide receiver out of Arizona State, a big play guy, a former running back, so yards after the catch, big with this guy. He'll probably be the punt returner, kickoff returner. We're going to ask Grant Cohn a little later on if that's the case. But how cool is this? Born in Rockland, his mom was a 49er fan, so he posted a picture of himself at 4 years old wearing this 49ers turtleneck pretty cool.
Yeah, and the 49ers used to train there in Rockland, so people of his mom's demographic probably grew up at that time when Joe Montana and Dwight Clark and Ronnie Lott and all those guys were training in Rockland. That was quite a spectacle during those years. The other thing that they like about him is they said that he has what would be considered kind of an NBA wingspan when they talk about length, and he has the wingspan of much taller receivers, so they like how he can stretch out and go for a ball in a crowd, or to stretch out and get a ball that's in the open field.
Well, that sounds a little bit like Emmanuel Sanders, who obviously is no longer with them. He signed as an unrestricted free agent with the Saints. But here is Brandon Ayuk.
My mom's been a huge 49ers fan her whole life, so that kind of bled on me a little bit when I was younger. I know that this offense is crazy. The offensive coordinator, Coach Shanahan, is a great offensive coordinator. He moves people around. Just the way that he manufactured touches for Debo last year and just gets everyone involved. I just know that it's a scary offense. So I'm very excited to get added to that offense.
Well, Brandon Ayuk was not one of the big three receivers that we heard so much about going into the draft and guys that potentially the 49ers would be interested in. But Kyle Shanahan says they got the guy they wanted.
I think he has the tools to be great. I think he has the mindset to be great. And I promise you, schematically, we're going to give him every chance to do that. And when that's the case, and you have a guy wired that way, and you have a system that way, I mean, what can hold him back? And I mean, there's always injuries that you can't hold into it. But Brandon is. You guys asked if he's the top guy. He was my favorite receiver I evaluated. There's no doubt on that.
So the 49ers certainly hope that Ayuk is a guy that they can put in right away. Of course, then on Friday, they had no picks. But on Saturday, before the draft even started, we found out the longest tenured 49er, one of the all-time 49ers, Joe Staley, he retired. And
I think the one thing that we all remembered about Staley, a guy who was always a 49er, a guy that you have to feel bad for, that he was in 2 Super Bowls but never got a chance to be on the winning side of a Super Bowl, a guy who was here for the absolute lows, 2-14 teams, and then going to the Super Bowl, a very versatile athlete. They even used him as an eligible receiver a couple of times. A guy that was a big locker room guy for the 49ers, and a guy that all of us in the media will certainly miss because we always enjoyed talking to him.
A stand-up guy, like a man's man, a little bit sarcastic, which was kind of refreshing sometimes. When he wanted to talk, he was very engaging. When he didn't give you a whole lot. Well, what a career for Joe Staley, and good for him for going out the way he wants to go out, apparently. But to make up and fill that void, the 49ers traded with Washington for a very large offensive tackle, Trent Williams, who didn't even play football last year. He had a health scare. Cancerous tumor, softball size, he said, was removed from his scalp. He didn't like how Washington handled the whole thing. But when he did play, which was 9 years in the NFL, he made the Pro Bowl 7 of those years. And so this guy can really play. He's going to be 32 in July, so that is a thing we got to look out for in terms of his productivity and what's left in the final year of his contract. But he was the 4th overall pick in 2010 in Washington, and Kyle Shanahan was his offensive coordinator at that time, so he knows him well. But we got to flash back, Joe, because in 2013, 7 years ago, there was a playoff game between the Seattle Seahawks, when Richard Sherman played for the Seahawks. They beat Washington, and here's what happened after the game with Sherman in Trent Williams' face. Williams didn't like it.
Hey, what you gonna do, boy? I'm gonna punch you in your boy. Ain't do a thing, boy.
That was not just a little love tap. I mean, that was Joe, he got smacked in the face.
He did, and it's funny how you root for the laundry. Now that he's a 49er, there's already tweeting back and forth where Sherman is welcoming him to the team. So it's funny how those things happen, and then the next thing you know, you turn around and the guy's your teammate.
Yeah, well, Sherman says he's laughing his you-know-what off, but he does want a rematch, Joe. Apparently he does want a rematch.
All right, well, and normally on day 3 of the draft, it's not a very high-profile day, but as we've already been saying, the 49ers were very busy, and they made another trade. You and I had talked about this, how there was a logjam at running back. You had a feeling that somebody had to be moved out of there, and it ended up being Matt Breida. The other trade that they made, Marques Goodwin, was something they'd been trying to do for a while. But again, in the kind of planning for the future, they recognized that there were deals to be made, and they made those deals on day 3.
Yeah, and they used those picks, one of them for Colton McKivitz, the offensive lineman out of West Virginia, in that trade with Breida going to Miami. And for the other trade with Marques Goodwin going to Philadelphia, they drafted with that 6th-round pick, they got Charlie Werner, the tight end out of Georgia. So George Kittle has a fellow tight end rookie joining him on the roster here, Joe.
I think the one thing that we can conclude about the 49ers is they had a pretty good idea on day 3 going in. It feels like they had an idea about Staley. They were able to move up, draft an offensive lineman, make a trade for another offensive lineman. Earlier in the draft on day 1, they drafted for a position that they had traded away to get picks. It's funny how one kind of begets another, but it does feel like they had a pretty sound strategy going into this draft.
All right, well, who better to talk about all of this than a man with, never short on opinions, Grant Cohn, formerly of the Santa Rosa Press, Democrat. But Grant, congratulations. I see now Sports Illustrated under your name. That's huge.
Thank you so much. I feel like I'm still doing the same thing, though.
Well, yeah, you are. And thankfully you're covering this out. You've been covering the 49ers for what, 7 years, 8 years?
10. This is my 10th season.
10 years. All right. Don't want to jip you. We'll want to ask you real quick about the trade for Trent Williams and the Staley retirement. Do you think Trent Williams was off last year? We know that. He's going to be 32. Is he going to slide right in? Is this an upgrade or a downgrade in the end?
I'm supposed to be controversial and negative, but I think it's an upgrade. Nothing against Joe Staley. He's one of the greatest 49ers of all time, but he'll be 36 in August. He broke 2 bones last year, and he's saying his body's breaking down. He can't play anymore. Trent Williams is only 31. He sat out with a contract dispute, but he can play. He's still in his prime. He might be the best left tackle in the game. They got him for cheap. It's an upgrade. The only question is it a long-term solution or is it a short-term rental because he's not signed past 2020?
Well, Grant, you were on the same conference call that I was where John Lynch was talking about foundational players. And, nobody's going to tell you exactly who they're looking at, but I do believe him that he had about a half a dozen in mind, and he had the 13th pick and said if one of them is still there at that point, we're going to use that pick. He got a chance to trade down to 14. Do you feel like he got a foundational player that he was looking for when that pick came around at 14?
Yeah, I really like Kinlaw. He's a hell of a player. He's not Solomon Thomas. He went to the Senior Bowl and played well. The only thing that gives me pause about him, 2 things. One, he does have knee tendonitis. And that may not be an issue at 22, but it doesn't get better. It's degenerative. What's he going to be like at 25? So for him to be a foundational piece, he needs to be on the team for 10 years. That's the definition of a foundational piece. He may be more of a short-term fix to get the 49ers back to the Super Bowl this season. I think the 49ers are sort of thinking more short-term than long-term. Is that how you see it?
When you have what you figure as a core of players that could potentially get you back there again, you do have to play for now. And in a sense, they did that last year by trading their 3rd and 4th picks away to get Emmanuel Sanders, by trading the 2 to have D Ford. And again, going back to what John Lynch said, if you told me I could use a 2 to get D Ford right now, would you do that in that draft? And he said, I absolutely would. So I can't really fault their logic in that regard.
Yeah, and with Kinlaw, again, he's a solid player. He may have injury issues. The issue with him is he came to the 49ers basically in a 1-for-1 swap for DeForest Buckner.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, can he ever live up to that? That's tough because Buckner was a foundational player. I saw him as the Staley of the defense, not just an elite player, but a leader, someone who played well when the team was bad, when the team was good, didn't matter. He seemed like he kind of deserved to retire as a 49er and go out the way Staley did. So that's the issue with Kinlaw. It's a trade, not just a pick.
But the one difference also being the contractual situation there as well, that they were not going to be able to pay all 3 of those free agents top money under the cap. So that's the one additional thing that comes into play there when you're talking person for person.
Now, Grant, I want to ask you about the second pick because they obviously traded up to get him. And, I saw you tweeting, did they have to trade up? I guess if he's your guy, though, and my question for you is, why did Shanahan have him ranked higher than CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy and some of these other guys that were still out there?
That's a great question. This Brandon Ayuk, they call him the Yak King. He led college football in yards after the catch. He almost had 10 yards after the catch per play.
Wow.
So if you see the way Shanahan's trying to build his offense around Jimmy G, it's different than how he built it around Matt Ryan. They have different skill sets. Matt Ryan could really air it out. Jimmy's more of a short and intermediate passer like Tom Brady. So I think instead of having a deep threat like Marques Goodwin, who they didn't really use the last couple of years, or even Emmanuel Sanders, who kind of got phased out and didn't do that much, bring in another guy who can take short passes and turn those into home runs. I think that's what the Niners are thinking.
I want to ask you about a guy that they're going to be seeing a lot of, I think, in Isaiah Simmons with the Arizona Cardinals, taken 8th overall, because some people have said he's like a Patrick Willis type of player. All I know is he's a freak of athleticism, 6'4", 238, 4'3", 940. Do you think he's going to be in Jimmy Garoppolo's face over the next 5 years?
You know, I was thinking he's going to be in George Kittle's face. I feel like the Cardinals wouldn't have taken him if they didn't have to face Kittle twice a year, because Kittle puts you in such a tough position. How do you match up with him? If you put a linebacker against him to respect his blocking, he'll just run routes on you and tear you up through the air. If you put a safety on him because he's such a good route runner, the Niners will just run it down that safety's throat all day. How many teams have a player who can really match up against Kittle the blocker and Kittle the route runner? Well, maybe just the Cardinals now. It's a smart pick for them.
Grant, I want to ask you, which team do you think in the entire draft, who was the big winner? Who improved the most, in your opinion, whether by trade before the draft or through the draft?
The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They added Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski to a team that already had Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and O.J. Howard. I mean, that team came out of nowhere. That's going to be the team the Niners have to go through. And then in the AFC, I feel like the Colts. The Colts added Phillip Rivers, Michael Pittman Jr., the running back from Wisconsin. That team is it's still the Chiefs league, but I feel like the Colts could compete with the Ravens in the AFC. Those two teams.
DeForest Buckner as well, right?
Oh yeah, good call. Absolutely.
I'm going out on a limb here. I saw Phillip Rivers live both Raider games this last year. Phillip Rivers doesn't even get you to the AFC Championship game. I'm going on a limb. You guys could call me on this next year at this time, or it'll be actually a little less than a year from now. But what I saw Phillip Rivers in the 2 games I saw last year, I think he's already done. So
Grant, argue with Joe that that's not true.
Okay, the way I see Phillip Rivers is he's still a good quarterback, but he's a statue. He needs an elite offensive line. If he doesn't have it, he's non-functional. He will throw you out of the games with his picks. I think the Colts do have that offensive line. They have Quentin Nelson. If he can succeed anywhere, I think it's there because he'll have a good O-line and a good running game and some good receivers too. But I hear what you're saying.
Did the Packers do Aaron Rodgers dirty?
Yes, absolutely. It seems like there's a cold war going on right now between Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers. And it's like they're both trying to take credit for the 13-3 season and both trying to deflect blame for how it ended. The way I see it is Aaron Rodgers carried that franchise last year. They had a rookie head coach who was in over his head. Aaron Rodgers carried that team, and they're trying to make him seem like he's the problem. That's funny. Yeah. If they run him out of town, watch him end up in New England. Watch.
We should say they traded up to the 26th spot to draft a quarterback,
yes,
Jordan Love. And it's like, why not give him some receivers? I think Aaron Rodgers is a pretty good quarterback.
Yeah, he only has one good receiver. He has Devontae Adams. Patrick Mahomes has 3 good receivers and a tight end. That's how you equip an elite quarterback. You don't put one of his or both of his hands behind his back, which is what Green Bay is essentially doing. So it seems like they're trying to move on, and I wouldn't be surprised if he was playing for another team in a year.
Hey, Grant, last thing before we let you go, I want you to evaluate Roger Goodell's performance in his basement. Give me the lowdown on Roger Goodell.
It's like someone told him, "Hey, Roger, be relaxed, be normal, be a normal person." And it's like, okay, well, how do I do that? Do I laugh? Do I talk to the screen? It seemed like he was trying so hard to be a normal human being, and he couldn't possibly do it. It's probably been decades since he was a normal human being, since he did his own laundry. I mean, that was just a role he wasn't built for.
He tried to dance with Jerry Jeudy. I don't know if it's on the TikTok.
I'm gonna show you how to get it. It go right foot up, left foot slide.
But when I say TikTok and Roger Goodell in the same sentence, I don't know.
But I liked how he kept saying, boo me, as if he's in on the joke. No, it's not a joke. People just genuinely don't like you, and they boo you. That's the funny part.
Yeah. All right, Grant, thanks very much. We appreciate your time and your insights as always.
Hey,
thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we'll look forward to doing this in the fall in the studio when we can actually look at you.
Looking forward to it.
All right.
All right, Joe. Well, I think enough talk about the 49ers. I think we must dive into the Raiders draft now.
Do we have to?
Listen, a lot of Raider fans in the Bay Area. We know that the reason they left was all about money and Mark Davis getting richer. And the one thing I hate is that you can never make the argument that the Raider fans or atmosphere will be better in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of longtime Raider fans, Jason, and there's pretty much two schools of thought. There are the ones who say, you know, Raider Nation forever, and I don't care if they move their team to Augusta, Maine. I'm a Raider fan, and I'm going to go see a game there. And then there are the ones who say, you broke my heart once, you came back, I gave you my heart again, and you broke it again. And all of my gear and whatever, I'm not wearing my stuff again, you're dead to me. So I really can understand the emotion of both, but you're absolutely right. When your business model is based on the visiting team providing half of the attendance, well, you just became the Carson Chargers who played 16 road games last year.
Yeah. All right, well, so with that introduction, the Raiders had the 12th pick overall. Unlike the 49ers, they stood pat, and they drafted a speedy guy. Al Davis loves speed. This guy isn't only fast, he was the fastest player at the Combine. Henry Ruggs III showed up draft day in a white robe. A lot of folks said, man, couldn't he have worn something, you know, maybe a button-up shirt or a polo shirt or something? Why is he in a white robe? Well, here's the deal. He wasn't just chilling. He actually had a little promotion with Old Spice. It wasn't explained well, but Old Spice donated $320,000 to the United Way, and they wanted to draw attention to that. So that's for a good cause. As for Ruggs, he ran a 4.27 out of Alabama, and he's the third leading receiver all time.
So he was going kind of Hugh Hefner then, hosting stuff in a robe then, wasn't he? But
yeah, he was big time hef. Now, as for their second pick, which happened 7 picks later, number 19 overall, John Gruden made the call to Damon Arnett, cornerback out of Ohio State.
Damon, this is John Gruden with the Las Vegas Raiders. How you doing, man?
What's going on, Coach?
Me and Mike Mayock are getting ready to make a pick here in the first round. And let me ask you this: can I trust you? Can I trust you with my entire family?
Man, you can trust me with it, man. I'll protect them like it's my own.
I mean, this Raider family that we're putting together is really special. You understand that, right?
Yes, sir.
So after Gruden called him, he wasn't a liar. Commissioner Roger Goodell, he made his way to his basement podium, if you will, and he made the announcement.
The Las Vegas Raiders select Damon Arnett, defensive back, Ohio State.
Arnett, 6 foot 195, a physical cornerback. He beat Michigan 4 times, so that's pretty good when you play at Ohio State. And he's from St. Thomas Aquinas High School. And Joe, I know you're very familiar with that high school.
In Fort Lauderdale, Florida, I got to say that anybody who comes out of that program is going to be a disciplined player. That is the same place where both Joey and Nick Bosa attended high school. And when we were there just this last winter for the Super Bowl, we got a chance to go down there and catch up with the guy who coached both of those guys. And you can imagine how happy he was when John Bosa showed up with his 2 sons in tow and said, hey, I'd like to find a place for my 2 boys to enroll in high school and play football.
And he rolled out the red carpet for him.
Yes.
Well, joining us now to talk more about the Raiders' first round as well as the rest of their draft, Vic Tafur, who's been covering the Raiders for quite some time with The Athletic. And Vic, I understand that you're going to make the move to Vegas if there is a season, I guess, coming up.
Yeah, at some point, eventually. I'm not sure when exactly will happen, but I'll be there in some regard when they probably get their feet in the ground there.
Well, here's what I want to know about Vic, Jason. I don't know if you know this, but Vic is famous for he always has a hat on with a V, whether it's Virginia or whether it's Villanova or probably Virginia Tech. He might even have Vermont. I want to know, Vic, do you have a new Vegas hat yet that you could sport?
Not yet, no. I got a Vanderbilt one, so it's always V for Vic. That's my thing. VT is actually the best because Virginia Tech is Vic Tafur, but that's a little too much. I don't want to go too.
Okay, that's good.
No, you gotta strut a little bit, right? You gotta believe in yourself.
Exactly. My brand.
Hey, tell us what the Raiders, other than speed, obviously, in their first round pick and a physical cornerback. Give us a nutshell on these first 2 picks that they made.
Well, I think Ruggs is obviously a John Gruden choice. I think he said before he wants his own version of Tyreek Hill, kind of a game breaker. He can run jet sweeps and run slants, can go the distance all the time. So I think that was kind of not easy, but kind of you can see that one coming. I think Jerry Jeudy might be a more polished receiver, but I think Riggs is kind of the fit he wants, the old Al Davis style of down the field, big plays. Arnett, Damon Arnett, the cornerback from Ohio State, definitely was a reach. I think most people had him as the 8 to 10 best cornerback on the board. So I think obviously they fell in love with the guy. Mike Max, they spent a lot of time at Ohio State. Very physical corner. John Gruden says he's a kind of an old school kind of guy. Reminds him of Aqib Talib, kind of very physical, in your face kind of player, which he loves. So again, he's only a reach if he doesn't do well. If he does well, that was a great pick. So I think they're very happy with both those picks. Obviously, the jury will be out in our net a little bit until we see what he can do.
Well, Vic, is this the time now? We saw obviously 2 years when the Raiders dealt away all those veteran players and picked up all those draft picks. 2 number ones again. They still got a number 1 from Chicago for the Khalil Mack trade. Is this the year now that they have to say, okay, we should see the fruits of some of the things that we've done the last couple of years?
Yeah, they're definitely poised to turn the corner this year. I think that's what they're looking at. I think they signed Trent Brown to that big deal last year, the right tackle, and he's making, I think, $22 million in salary this year. So definitely time to make that money worth it and be. Hopefully, he's a guy who can lead them to a playoff push. But definitely, they got Derek Carr back. They got some receiving talent in this draft. Josh Jacobs was a huge player for him last year, kind of already one of the top running backs in the league. So Darren Waller was a big find at tight end. So the offense should be one of the top ones in the league, ideally.
Well, you mentioned the receivers, with their next pick in the 3rd round, Lynn Bowden. I mean, that might be one of the more intriguing picks in the draft because he had nearly 1,500 yards as a running back.
He was a receiver on most of the draft boards, and when they posted the little release, when they picked him, they said receiver. But Mike Max says he's going to be a run. Josh Jacobs at first. He's using the slot a little bit. He's going to return punts. Definitely a kind of Mickey Miss kind of player, definitely a game breaker. Some of his highlights in college and high school are pretty amazing. So just a guy who's kind of dynamic player. They hopefully can move him. Even maybe a wildcat quarterback once in a while. So a guy they can find a place for and kind of surprise teams with his speed and playmaking ability.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because Josh Jacobs, he had an outstanding rookie season. So to draft a running back, presumably that high, a little interesting.
Yeah, I think, but they want to run the ball a lot. So ideally, I think if Josh Jacobs gets 20 touches a game, this kid gets like 5 to 8, and then also the punt returning ability is going to be huge for him and the Raiders. So I think it makes sense. Jacobs kind of is a very physical running back who got hurt last year on his shoulder, played pretty much most of the year with a bum shoulder. So I think he's a tough kid. If they can give him a little bit less of a load, then that's what they'll do.
How about the rest of their draft, Vic? The Raiders didn't have anything after the 4th round. How did you feel about how they did in those middle couple of rounds?
Did okay. We mentioned Bowden. They also got in the 3rd round, they got Brian Edwards, is a big receiver out of South Carolina, the all-time leading receiver out of South Carolina. Big kid, about 6'3". Gruden says like a Terrell Owens type body, so definitely broke his foot. That's why I think he kind of fell on the draft board a little bit. But definitely could be. I think they envisioned him being a starter, not right away, but probably next year. He and Ruggs are on both sides of the offense, ideally. So if you got if you get 2 starting receivers out of this draft, that's pretty good. Then the other 3rd round pick was Tanner Muse, who was a safety at Clemson. They love Clemson guys. He's going to be a linebacker at this level. I think he's more of a project type. I don't think he's going to play right away, which is kind of it's a weird thing for a 3rd round pick to not be a guy you can plug in and try and play right away. But I think that one was a reach. But again, whatever. Who knows what a reach is in these days? But so I think the receivers are the big deal. Ruggs and Edwards.
Yeah, I guess if it works out, it's never a reach, as you said. The stadium, we've seen shots of it. We've heard all sorts of rumors for the last year, whether they're going to be ready, not going to be ready. It sure looks from the outside, like they're going to be ready to play if there is a season, that if they do start on time. What are you hearing about the stadium? Would it be ready for week 1 if there is a week 1 in September?
Yeah, I think they're on track. I think they got the roof done. I think the goal was late July. I think it was. I think they're on track, and they've had, I want to say 3, maybe just 2, but 2 workers came down with the coronavirus, but they kind of pulled them off the site and kept plugging away. So it's kind of been deemed an essential thing in Nevada. So obviously there's a lot of money behind it, a lot of people behind it. So it's going to get done. I think if they have to work all night until end of July, I think it'll get done and it'll be ready to go. But again, they'll probably have a little wiggle time because I can't imagine the season will start on time, but we'll see what happens.
What are you anticipating about moving there and the lifestyle and an NFL team in that city full time? There are a lot of kind of unknowns at this point. What are you anticipating about all that?
I think it'll be fun. I think it'll be an adventure. I think they mentioned the lifestyle. I think people, I'd be a little concerned about the players, but young guys, in that environment with a lot of money, the town's 24/7. Clubs are going on a Tuesday night, and you're always, one step away from a casino, a high limit room. So I'm very curious what they're going to do as far as preparing players. And I don't think they're going to have a traveling security team to make sure those guys aren't going to the Caesar's Palace High Rollers room or to I don't know the strip club name, but I just think that we'll take a lot of precautionary steps, I think, to make sure everything goes smoothly.
All right, Vic. Well, just real quick, how would you rate this draft? They obviously didn't have any picks after round 4, but overall, with the guys they got, what grade do you give them?
The grades are tough. I'd probably give them a B because I like the Edwards pick a lot. I think that was a great pick in the 3rd round. I think he's going to be a big-time player. I think Ruggs is definitely very exciting. He's very tough. He's not really a typical speedster. He's kind of a tough kid who definitely can see in the highlights the way he tackles and interception returns, and just kind of his edge to him I like. So I like those 2 picks a lot. Arnett, I have no idea. I mean, I get he's physical, but again, a guy who's 2nd team All Big Ten, I'm not sure should be picked 19th in the NFL draft. So that one we'll see. But I'll give him a B overall because he hit some needs. I think in these kind of things, you address your needs, you roll the dice, and you see what happens.
All right, Vic. Well, thanks very much for a little bit of your time. Looking forward to reading you covering the Raiders when they're playing for real in Las Vegas with The Athletic.
And we're going to watch and see what your lifestyle change might become when you spend full time there.
And you're going to be wearing that VT hat a little more down there on the strip.
Yeah, I'll probably just be there like part-time at first. We'll see what happens. But definitely I'll be there at some point. But, yeah, I mean, Vegas is going to be crazy. I definitely think the whole town's very excited about the Raiders.
All right, Joe, well, we've talked about the 49ers. We've talked about the Raiders. But how about the local guys from Cal and Stanford? One guy from Cal, interesting story, a walk-on, a track star, and he was the first local guy taken off the draft board, Ashton Davis.
Yeah, we always want to see how high they're going to go. You know what's kind of interesting? A couple of days ago, we've been doing this feature, This Day in Sports, and it was interesting to see that John Elway and Andrew Luck were both drafted on the same day, about 20-something years in between.
Wow.
Both by the Colts, which is pretty interesting. Once when they were in Baltimore, one said, "I'm never playing for you guys," and he didn't. And one guy who played for the Indianapolis Colts. So there's always interest in what the local guys are up to.
Well, Ashton Davis is a guy, we said, he's a Cal safety. He was drafted 68th overall by the Jets from Santa Cruz. And as we said, a track star. So good for him. He's a great athlete. And here's what he was saying about no matter where he got drafted before the draft, he was going to make that team pretty happy about it.
For me, it's just about getting my foot in the door. This has been a dream of mine my whole life. So regardless of where I'm selected, I'll be giving first-round talent to that team.
Well, Jason, we talked a second ago about Stanford quarterbacks. Stanford has become kind of tight end U now as far as the NFL is concerned.
Yeah, Colby Parkinson is the latest one to get drafted, and he's going to be in the 49ers division, taken by the Seahawks, the 133rd pick overall. He started 31 games the last 3 seasons, and then it was a Cal guy going 1 pick later. Jalen Hawkins to the Falcons with the very next pick, played safety at Cal, and played in all 50 games the last 4 years.
Well, and here's a guy that you would have to think is going to have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. Jared Weaver was the Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year, and he falls all the way to the 6th round, so you got to believe he's going to feel like he has something to prove.
Yeah, he's going to join Isaiah Simmons with the Arizona Cardinals, so he'll be trying to stop some of the 49ers running backs if he gets playing time and makes the team and try and get to Jimmy Garoppolo. And then Casey Toohill, a former Stanford linebacker, taken by the Eagles, 233rd overall pick, Casey Toohill.
It's always interesting, I think, to look at. One of the first things I do when I'm traveling to an away game is look down the roster really quickly and see how many Pac-12 guys there are on the various teams. And it's always interesting to me how many Cal and Stanford guys there are out there playing. There's quite a few in the NFL year to year.
Yeah, well, we'll see how many of these guys make the team. But Ashton Davis, the first one off the board in the 3rd round. Now, this draft was unique. We talked about it earlier. It's never happened before, a virtual draft like this with everybody with, hundreds of phone lines, Amazon Web Service streaming hundreds of video feeds everywhere. But there were some moments, Joe, and we saw some video clips. And I like this one by Tristan Wirfs, the Iowa offensive lineman. Now, He's 6'5", 320 pounds. The Bucks traded up one pick to number 13 with the 49ers to draft him. And look what he does. We've all heard of the box jump where you stand and jump up onto a platform or a box. He does it out of a swimming pool.
I don't know how you do that. That box jump is hard enough to do when you're on land. Throw a hole in the ground full of water and then you jump up as well. I honestly don't know how you do that.
Yeah, and then you mentioned tight end university. How about the tight end team of the NFL? The Chicago Bears drafted Cole Kmet, a tight end out of Notre Dame, 43rd overall. He becomes their 10th tight end on the roster.
Well, the only parallel I could think of to that was, did you know that when Brent Jones first came into camp with the 49ers, he had been cut by the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was number 6 on the depth chart, and they had him kind of dream up an injury so they could keep him around for a while because they knew what they had. But he was actually number 6 when he came in. I can't imagine what it'd be like to be number 10 coming in.
Yeah, obviously, if you filled your roster 10 out of the 53, that's 20% of your roster tight ends. Obviously, they'll pare it down for the 53-man. My favorite draft reacts, Joe, it wasn't even the player reacting. It was the 49ers when they drafted Javon Kinlaw. His father fell off the couch.
Well, if you ever wondered what this means to these families and these kids who have basically had this in their sights their whole lives, and then to see that day finally come true when they get selected, I'm not even sure that it's as much about the monetary thing as just kind of validation for all the time they put in to get there. And when it actually happens, it's a very emotional moment for a lot of these guys.
Well, the other cool thing about this draft, which made it relatable, we got to see these GMs and coaches as family men. We saw, as we showed you earlier, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan. And then we got to see some of these homes. And there was quite a wide range of homes, but I think the one that takes the prize for the most plush, Cliff Kingsbury, the head coach of Arizona, man, he looked like he was having a pretty relaxed time.
Well, and I'm not sure what message that sends in these times when Jerry Jones does the draft from his yacht. Now, how many of us have a yacht that we are streaming from in our homes? And I guess if you were going to say to me, there's going to be one guy who's going to conduct the draft from his yacht, probably Jerry Jones would be in my top 2 or 3 picks.
At the other end of the spectrum, the man who's won 6 Super Bowls, Bill Belichick. That was no frills. Just one man with his computer, very austere for him, except when he was replaced by his dog. Did you see that?
I didn't see that, but did he have his hoodie on? That's the one thing I was curious about him.
Yeah, no, very, very good stuff. So overall, I think it was an entertaining draft. And again, we can't tell you how these guys are going to work out for at least 1 or 2 years, maybe even 3. So everyone else, you're just speculating. When you hear the TV announcers and the experts talk about it, it seems like everybody is great by the time they get done telling the story of, oh, I love this pick or this and that. But in the end, the Niners might be 2 guys, 3 guys that make the roster. Some of the better teams, who have 10, 12 picks, maybe 2 or 3 make the roster, and maybe we never hear their names again. But still, great moments for all of these young players. Obviously, life-changing for all of them. Yeah,
it's a very inexact science. And you never hear anybody say, man, we sure had a terrible draft. We're going to be terrible this year. Everybody, 32 teams had, it was a wonderful draft. And we know that only 2 of them are going to make it to the Super Bowl.
Exactly. All right, Joe, well, should we wrap it up?
Let's do it. I hope the next time that we do something like this, Jason, we are back in the studio. You're standing in front of your big board as the guru and telling us people who we should take for week 1 in the fantasy game.
I hope you're right. I mean, hopefully I'll be talking about some of these rookies making a big impact. And I have a feeling that some of these receivers like Ruggs could be a few of them that are worth drafting. There was a fantastic receiving class this year.
Well, we know that you're the one that will be paying attention, and Mark and I will be sitting there amazed at the names that you come up with. Oftentimes guys that we've never heard of and said, man, the guru really dug deep this week.
Yeah, I'm about 50-50, but I'm doing my best. So, all right, Joe. Well, hey, thanks everybody at home for tuning in here to KTVU.com, our first all-digital draft show. So we really appreciate it.
Hope to be doing it the normal way next time we talk to you. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and be safe and be healthy.
See you later.